What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be giving you guys my full review on the iPhone 15 Pro here. I've had it for about a month and I've gathered some thoughts on it, so I decided it was time to go ahead and make this video. Now, I really like this phone. Of course, I upgraded from a 14 Pro last year, and if you guys watched my 14 Pro review, I absolutely love that phone, but really, this phone is literally just that, but a little bit better, and I really enjoy it. So here we go. We're going to start this the same way I always start my iPhone reviews. We're going to start with the design of the phone, and then we'll kind of work our way through it. So the design of this phone actually is a big change for this year. For the past 6 or 7 years, iPhones have been made of stainless steel, at least the outer frame has been, and so this year they decided to change it up and go with titanium. So they've only made a few products out of titanium in the past. A couple of things that come to mind are the titanium PowerBook G4 in the early 2000s, and of course the Apple Watch Ultra is also made of titanium, so they decided to expand it to the iPhone this year. And I think, honestly, the primary reason for that is because people were always complaining about the weight of the stainless steel iPhones. So titanium actually has a very similar strength to stainless steel, but on paper it's about 10% lighter. And so the interesting thing about that is it's only 10% lighter on paper, but it actually feels like a lot more than that in the hand. So I think that has to do with the fact that, of course, the outer frame of the phone is on the outer edge of the device, and so taking weight away from the outer portion of the device as opposed to the middle makes a bigger difference. And so this phone does feel quite a bit lighter, and it's something that I didn't really have strong opinions about, but it is nice for like extended use in that. So there you have it. Now, of course, on this titanium frame, it does have a matte PVD coating as opposed to the glossy coating that we had on the stainless steel. And I actually really like this. I wasn't a huge fan of the coating on the stainless steel just because it was glossy and it was really bad about attracting like finger oils and grease and whatnot. This still does to an extent. You may not be able to notice it actually, but it still does attract some finger oils and whatnot, but in my experience it's a lot better than the stainless steel was. It gets way less greasy and gross feeling in the hand, so that's really nice. Now, another big change you're going to notice with this frame is that they actually decided to round the edges a little bit. The previous stainless steel iPhones were completely square all the way around, but they've given the bands of the phone just a subtle curve right in here on each side, and so they've match that with the front glass too as well, so you'll kind of notice the reflection of light. There is a little bit of a curve to the front glass, so that is nice, and it does actually feel quite a bit better in the hand. This phone is way more comfortable to hold versus the previous iPhone. So I didn't really have strong opinions about this when I bought this phone. I didn't think it was going to make that much of a difference, but holding it in the hand compared to the previous iPhones, it really does make a big difference. It's a lot more comfy to hold. So there you have it. Other design changes you're going to notice is the mute switch. The familiar mute switch on the iPhone is gone. It has now been replaced with this button. Apple's calling it the action button. Of course, they took this from the Apple Watch, and basically what this allows you to do is, by default, it's still set up as the mute switch, but it also has 7 or 8 different preset functions that you can select, being like flashlight, launching a camera, setting a focus mode, that kind of stuff. But then there's also, the last option also is to use shortcuts to configure it, and we're going to get into this a little bit later, but you can essentially use the Shortcuts app to really make this thing do pretty much whatever you want. Now, I haven't really been doing that. I've used the mid switch too much to give it up, but it is nice to have for people that want to use it. So that's cool. Moving on, other small design changes, of course, this is another big one. The iPhone now has a USB-C port as opposed to Lightning that they've had since 2012. That's a big change, and of course Apple, I don't think, would have done this without help from the European Union. They kind of forced them to do it, but it is nice to have. We now have a Type-C port on here, just like pretty much every other Android phone and whatnot. And on the Pro phones, this also does support USB 3.1 transfer speeds, so that is pretty nice to have as well. And it also supports bidirectional charging. You can charge other devices off of the iPhone with this port, so that's kind of neat. And if I don't know if I can get this on video, but another neat little Easter egg is right in there. I don't know if it's going to focus, but you can kind of see it. Inside the port, it actually has the model number of the iPhone engraved in there. There you go, you can kind of see it. So that's kind of a neat little Easter egg. And then moving towards the back, we still have a frosted back that I like. Of course, we do have this nice blue color, which I'll get to in a minute, but another small thing is that the cameras actually don't protrude quite as much out of the back of the phone as they did on the 14 Pro. Now, of course, it's going to be tough to illustrate this without having a 14 Pro right next to it, but the phone is ever so slightly thicker overall, so the cameras don't stick out quite as far as they did on the 14 Pro. So that's kind of neat. And then another thing about the back glass is they've actually changed the design a little bit to kind of match the iPhone 14 of last year, where this back glass is now actually replaceable separately from the frame, whereas on the previous Pro iPhones, it was part of the frame and not replaceable. You would have to pay Apple about $600 to replace the entire housing, the back housing on the phone. But now these back glass panels do come off if you end up cracking it, and it is quite a bit cheaper to get it fixed from Apple. So that's kind of neat. Then, of course, like I mentioned before, I got the phone in this beautiful blue titanium color. I really, really love this. It's a very nice, classy, elegant looking blue. And, it's not super loud or anything, but I really dig it. It's really, really nice. And, of course, paired with my blue Taurus case, it still kind of lets me see the blue through the case a little bit. And then, the sides are blue as well. So I'm really happy about having a blue iPhone again. Blue is my favorite color. And I was kind of disappointed last year when the 14 Pro did not offer a blue color. So that's honestly a big reason I got this phone, as vain as that sounds. I absolutely love blue. And this phone is absolutely gorgeous. So that's pretty much it for the design. So there you have it. We're going to move on to the display next. Alright, let's go ahead and move on to the display here. So not a ton of changes compared to last year. Of course, the 14 Pro brought in a couple of changes, namely the dynamic island and a couple of other things, brighter screen and whatnot. But this display is essentially the same in that regard. The bezels are ever so slightly thinner on the 15, and again, it's one of those things you're not really going to notice drastically unless you have the phone side by side. But honestly, when I first got this phone and started using it, I did kind of notice the increased display size a little bit. It's not a whole lot, but it does make a little bit of a difference, I think. So that's that. The dynamic island is still here, of course. It's still great as ever. I think this is one of Apple's best features in years. Of course, anyone who knows me knows that I absolutely hated the display notch that we had before, and I think this dynamic island looks a lot better, but also, the functionality it introduces is really, really nice. So big fan of that. And then, of course, we still have 120 Hz ProMotion. That never went anywhere. So I absolutely love that too. I was waiting for that for many years, and we got that with the 13 Pro. And that's still here. And really, this display still is just as fantastic as it was last year, and I'm a big fan of it. So that's really all I can say. There's not a whole lot of other changes with the display, so that's pretty much it. That was a big story last year, but it's still here. It's still a fantastic display, and I have no complaints with that. So let's go ahead and move on to the SoC performance and the connectivity of this phone next. So, of course, we did get an upgrade this year, as we usually do. We're now running the Apple A17 Pro system on a chip. So that is now a 3nm chip. I believe it is the first phone to have that. So that's neat. It has 2 performance cores that run at 3.78 gigahertz, and then it has 4 efficiency cores that run at 2.02 gigahertz. So a little bit of a clock speed bump compared to last year. So that's cool. We now have 8 gigabytes of LPDDR5 RAM, up from 6 that we've had for, the last 2 or 3 iPhones there. So that's kind of nice to have a little extra RAM. Never a bad thing. And then we also have a USB 3 controller on the system on a chip, like I mentioned before. So it can now support up to 10 gigabits per second transfer speeds through that USB-C port. Of course, you do have to have a different cable. The one that ships with the iPhone is only a 2.0 cable, and so you're going to have to go on Amazon or something like that and buy a thicker 3.1 cable if you do want to take advantage of that. But other than that, we also do have a new 6-core GPU, and the GPU in this phone actually also supports hardware ray tracing, which I believe is pretty wild for a phone. And this SoC does actually approach the M1 desktop SoC in performance. And of course, with this phone, it does feel insanely responsive, as you would expect for a new iPhone. And of course, this is more than enough power. It should feel nice and snappy and high performance for years to come, so that's cool. Apple actually showed console-level games running on this phone in their keynote. I don't know who's going to be doing that, but they showed like Resident Evil, for example, which is like I believe an Xbox or a PlayStation 4 game running on a cell phone. So honestly, I think that's pretty ridiculous. But other than that, we also do have a new Qualcomm X70 modem, which is an upgrade from the X65 we had last year. So you are going to see faster network speeds with that, which is nice. And then we also do have Wi-Fi 6E support, which is a minor upgrade over Wi-Fi 6, but it's there. We also do have a new ultra-wideband chip in the SoC, so you can have farther range for connected devices like your AirTags, other iPhones, and the Apple Watch. So for locating those things, that's nice. And you can actually use the Find My app to locate someone else who also has an iPhone 15 or your Apple Watch or anything. I believe up to about 60 feet now, so that's really nice to have. And then you can also now use Find My via satellite. That's a new expansion on the satellite connectivity that we got last year. So you can find things via satellite if you end up losing them in a remote area. And you can also call AAA roadside assistance. They partnered with AAA for that, so that's really nice to have. So a lot of new connectivity stuff here. None of it's a huge deal, of course, if you have a 14 Pro, but those are all nice things to have and not bad at all. So like I mentioned before, this phone feels amazing. I've actually played like GTA San Andreas on it and stuff, and been happy with the performance. So that's pretty cool. Alright, let's go ahead and move on to the cameras now, because there are quite a few changes, and that was one of the other things that kind of drove me to get this phone, because I take a lot of photos with my phone. So we now have a larger 48 megapixel sensor. Of course, we got the 48 megapixel primary with the 14 Pro last year, but the actual sensor is a bit larger this year, so you're going to see increased low light performance with that. And then something else that you will also notice when you're taking photos with this phone is that the default photo mode in your primary 1x mode now is going to spit out 24 megapixel images instead of 12. So that's just a change to how they're binning the photographs. So a lot of photos you're going to take now are going to be 24 megapixels for that increased detail. So that's pretty nice. And the only exceptions are when you're in night or portrait mode, or you're zoomed in more than 2x, because of course at that point it can't pixel bin the image anymore, because you're kind of cropped into the middle 12 megapixels, but that's pretty cool. And then there is a lot of things going on in the background when you're taking these photos, and essentially what it's doing when it's taking photos like that is it's taking both a 48 megapixel image for that extra detail, but also it's taking a 12 megapixel image for dynamic range information, and it's basically stitching them together in the background, and it's doing all of that while you're snapping a photo with no shutter delay. So that's pretty impressive, given that, of course, the A17 can handle doing all of that stuff. But yeah, there's a lot of like computational photography stuff going on in the background. So another thing I want to mention while we're talking here is that if you go into the camera app here, you'll kind of notice that we do have some new preset focal lengths. So if I tap this 1x here, you can see it punches into 28 megapixels from 24, which is equivalent to 1.2x. Then if I punch in again, it is going to emulate a 35 megapixel, or millimeter photo length rather, and then back out to 24. So that's kind of neat. You have these preset photo modes. Photographers, I assume, are going to appreciate that. So that's neat. We also have a new option that was introduced with iOS 17. You can now switch between HEIF and JPEG Max 48 megapixel processed photo options. So if I go up here to this, you can see that if I turn this on, it's going to shoot a 48 megapixel processed image, and so you can actually shoot full resolution 48 megapixel images that are just processed as a JPEG. And so that's kind of nice. Before, with the 14 Pro, you could shoot 48 megapixel images, but it would only shoot it in that ProRAW photo mode, and so you'd have to do some post editing and stuff like that. And sometimes you just want the extra detail without having to do all of that. So that's neat. Another change that you have with this camera is the phone is actually going to automatically pick up faces and other things like that when you take a photo. So even if you're not in the portrait mode down here, you can snap a photo and then go into the Photos app, and then you can actually change it into a portrait mode photo later. So that's kind of neat. A lot of people, I'm assuming when they do that, they'll take a picture and then they'll go, oh, I wish I could have made that into a portrait mode photo. And now you can actually do that. And so honestly, I have noticed an actual difference with this camera. The photos do seem a bit sharper than the 14 Pro, especially when you're zoomed in all the way. So that's kind of nice. You're seeing that extra, detail with those 24 megapixel and 48 megapixel images, of course. So that's pretty cool. And then another little tidbit about the camera is that you can actually shoot log video with this. Now, I'm not a pro, videographer or anything, so I really don't know a whole lot about that stuff, but as far as I know, shooting log video with a phone is pretty remarkable. I don't think there's any other phone that can actually do that these days. So, pretty impressed with the cameras. I've been happy with them. Like I mentioned, the low light performance does seem quite a bit better, so that's always nice to have for taking photos in the dark or whatever. So that's that. I'll go ahead and post up a couple of photos that I took on my vacation earlier this month for you guys to see. But overall, I've been really happy with the camera on this phone. No complaints whatsoever. So there you have it. So now I think I want to move on to iOS 17 as a whole. They do have a couple of things that I want to touch on. So the first thing I'm going to go with actually is the action button configuration. So if we go into settings here, you can see we have a new thing for the action button. Now, I just have it set up as silent mode because I use that every single day, but we can go ahead and go through the options here. So the next one is actually going to be just setting a focus. And if we move over to this one here, you can see you can launch the camera with it, so that's neat. Or you can launch the flashlight or your voice memo app. So if you want to create recordings regularly, you can do that. You can set it to the magnifier, so you can zoom in on objects and whatnot. And then this one is going to be pretty wild. Now, I'm not going to do any of this, but basically you can set it to the shortcut, and then you can go into the Shortcuts app, which is actually over here, and you can actually assign it to a shortcut. So there's all kinds of things. There's, starter ones in here, but, you can launch pretty much anything you want with this, and you can get pretty crazy with it because the Shortcuts app is kind of almost like programming things. So you can actually configure this to do one thing with a short press and then another thing if you press it twice or something like that. I've seen people on YouTube do that. Now, that's a lot of hoopla that I'm not going to be using. I just have it set to the silent mode, but it is nice for people that keep their phones on silent or don't really use the mute switch much. It's kind of nice for them to have some additional configurability here. So that's cool. And then, look at this UI for this. I was going to mention this earlier, but whoever designed this needs a raise because this is just gorgeous. So there you have it. Now, another thing I want to mention, it's small, but I really want to mention it. I'm going to actually turn off the sleep focus here prematurely real quick so I can demo this. We now have extra customization on the lock screen. So if I tap my lock screen here and I hit customize, and then hit the lock screen here, we can now adjust the actual weight of the font. So if I move this slider, it actually makes the font thicker or thinner depending on your taste. So I just have it slightly thinner than stock. I like the way that looks. So something small, but I really enjoy that. Just a little bit of extra configurability there. So that's kind of nice to have. And then we also do, if I turn my sleep focus back on here so that we don't get notifications, but we also do have some new ringtones in iOS 17, so that's a big change because I believe they have not actually added new ringtones for, probably since iOS 7. So this is the first time that we have all new ringtones in iOS. So I actually like most of these. I am set to Kettle right here. I'm not going to play it because it's pretty loud or whatever, but there you have it. We all have all new ringtones, and all your classic ones are still in here that we had before. So there you have it. That's another small change. I've also noticed that the autocorrect with the keyboard is a little bit better. So if I go ahead in here and make a note, and then I start typing, so if I misspell a word and then go back, you can see it actually turns red, and then I can just tap on it, and then it'll do that. And it also corrects words based on context now, and it'll actually also let you swear, so that's kind of nice. It doesn't always work. It still has issues with that stuff. Sometimes it corrects words that are actually words and, don't make sense, but I've noticed it generally works a little bit better than the autocorrect did before, so that's kind of neat, I guess. And another thing we also have in the phone app is that when somebody's calling you, and you don't pick up, you can actually see a transcription of the voicemail on the lock screen as they're leaving it. And Apple's calling that live voicemail, but that's pretty nice. And that way, if you don't answer the phone, but then you see, they're talking about something important, you can just, answer it real quick and then get with them right away. So that's kind of a nice feature. I don't know if every carrier supports this, but I've seen it work on mine. I have AT&T. So, nice little feature to have. And then we also have a thing called voice isolation, which is pretty incredible, actually. If you're on a phone call and you're in a loud environment, like outdoors or whatever, you can actually enable that voice isolation feature. And it does a pretty good job of just sending, your voice over to the other caller. And it can actually cut down on noise quite a bit. So that's a neat feature. I haven't actually, used it yet because I don't make a ton of phone calls, but it is really cool, and that's something that they brought up in the keynote. So there you have it. And the other little feature that I just want to go over real quick is called standby. Now, when your iPhone is placed on its side, while it's on like a MagSafe charger, in other words, like that, it can actually turn into kind of just like a nightstand. So you can have it set up to show, photos or notifications or your clock or something like that, calendars, that kind of thing, when it's charging. So that's kind of neat. I haven't really used it, but I do think it's kind of a little bit of a neat feature. So there you have it. So I want to move on from iOS 17 now to the battery life, and it's not going to be remarkable or anything. I've honestly noticed no change from the 14 Pro. It seems about identical to that phone, but that is to say it is pretty good. Honestly, I charge this phone usually every other day. It does get topped off in my car as I drive to and from work, but I honestly think the battery life on this thing is pretty darn good. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my favorites here. I'll pull up a screenshot so you can see. This is back on September 27th, but I used the phone for 5 hours and 25 minutes in one day, and I had, 48% at that time. And then if we go over here, same thing, and you can see it's a little bit less, but 5 to 6 hours of screen on time with this phone is actually pretty good if you ask me, so I have no complaints with the actual battery life on this phone. And then if we go into the actual battery settings here, there are a couple of new things. So if we go into the battery health and charging menu right here, you can actually see that if we go into optimization, there is a new hard 80% charge limit. So that's pretty nice to have. I don't know why they don't bring this to the older iPhones, but basically if you enable that, the phone will not charge past 80%. So that's kind of nice for like when you're on a road trip and it's plugged in on your car all day. It just helps to preserve the battery a little bit, because batteries don't really like to be at 100% all the time. It's really not great for them, but so that's kind of nice to have. I wish they would bring that to older phones. Maybe they will. No new update. I don't know, but that's something new. And then if we go over here to the About screen, you can actually see that now, again, it's iPhone 15s only. I'm not really sure why, but if we scroll down here to the About screen, you can see that we now have a new cycle counter built into iOS. So you don't have to use coconut battery or something like that anymore to see the amount of cycles on your iPhone. So it tells you when the battery was manufactured, when it was first used, and then of course the cycle count. And as you can see, I'm only at 22, and I've had this phone for about a month. So again, I don't charge it every day, and I imagine my battery will last quite a while in that scenario. But those are some new things about the battery. Pretty happy. Neat little features. Again, I wish they would bring them to older phones. Maybe they will someday, but there you have it. So that's pretty much all I have to say about this phone, guys. Honestly, we'll just wrap it up. I absolutely love this phone. Honestly, I think it's absolutely fantastic overall, and it's extremely refined at this point. There's not a whole lot of things that they can improve, if you ask me, from this point. So it's really, really nice. We finally have like peak iPhone, and I mentioned this in my last 14 Pro review, but we have the dynamic island that replaced the ugly notch. That's great. We have 120 Hz Pro Motion now. Just makes the phone super smooth and responsive to use. We have great cameras. We have a nice build. I always love this kind of squared off design that they had with the iPhones. And there's really nothing I would change about this phone at this point. I absolutely love it. Now, honestly, I don't think you should upgrade from a 14 Pro, even though I did because I'm a bit of a phone snob. But if you have a 14 Pro, I'd recommend just hanging on to it. But if you have a 13 Pro, I'd say it could be worth it, depending on who you are. And then if you have anything older, I would highly recommend buying this phone. You're going to notice a big difference if you're, kind of hyper-fixated on things like I am. And if you're buying a $1,000 phone, then I think you would be. So I honestly think at this point, the 2 to 3 year upgrade cycle is the sweet spot for upgrading your phone. Smartphones are so good these days, like I mentioned, that really there is little to improve upon, and I honestly think we take that for granted sometimes with these phones. I hear a lot of people complaining that, this new phone is, not significantly different from the previous phone or the one before that or whatever, but really these companies design these phones nowadays because they know that people aren't going to be upgrading every year, and they kind of design phones around that. But at the same time, like I mentioned, there's really not a whole lot that they can improve upon because these phones are so good these days. But there you have it, guys. That's the iPhone 15 Pro review. I really like this one. I am going to try to keep it. I know my words don't really mean anything because I typically upgrade every year, but I really do love this phone, especially in this gorgeous blue color. So there you have it, guys. That is the iPhone 15 Pro review. I would like to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.